I'm going to spend a week inside Tacumbú prison. I'm quite nervous about going in there because it's the most dangerous place in this country. What is your advice?
Por eso lo que uno no tiene es meter la mano donde no debe meter. Acá hablamos de vida o muerte.
35 prison guards to 4,000 prisoners. I've never seen anything like it in any prison anywhere in the world. What are you looking for?
Comida para vender.
Oh, that's food?
Just wouldn't associate what I'm seeing right now with such a beautiful island.
You have armed officers in the watchtowers, and they have permission to shoot if somebody tries to escape?
Yes.
People seeing televisions and PlayStations in prison cells will be outraged.
Ich glaube, sie sollen ja, das Leben von draußen soll ja wieder angeglichen werden.
What is the purpose of prison?
It's a place where prisoners get punished. This is the prison. This is not Mama's house.
His hand touched my hand, and I felt that vibration of evil.
Question is, can the prison system do anything to rehabilitate this man? I don't think they can.
Nous donnons une chance. Pour reconstruire. C'est qui nous vient détruire.
Here comes a new guy who might have something that they want, and they're not going to ask me for it. They're going to take it.
Where's that rope? One moment. Let me put these.
What is pussy poppin', you beautiful humans? My name is Ariane Andrew.
I'm Matt Dillon, and welcome to another piping hot episode of Sipping the Tea, quarantine style, where we what, girl?
Where we sip the tea and our guests spill that tea.
I'm gonna give you that one, girl. I'm gonna give you that one yourself, honey.
That was so horrible.
What's up, Miss Little Glitty?
Hi, Mama.
Hey, everybody. So I'm super excited. You know what? One thing during quarantine, I've been trying to stay focused. Ariane and I have been busy, and our guest here, I happened to stumble across his Netflix show that I was like, holy moly. And then I backtracked through the story. So we've got host, investigative journalist, podcaster, author, Rowe, my friend. Welcome to Sipping the Tea, my friend.
Thank you for inviting me across the pond. I've been watching some of the other stuff you guys have been doing, and it's really interesting and it's really different. And I'm pleased to be here with you guys sipping the tea today.
Yes.
Happy, man.
Okay, so we're just gonna dive on in. So 2020 has been an interesting year. There's been a lot of anger, a lot of uncertainty, isolation, social uprise, et cetera, et cetera. How did you approach isolation, and what have been like some positive takeaways that you have had with this interesting year of 2020?
Yeah, no, I kind of hear you. I think it's been different for different people in different parts of the world. I think for those who have accepted the idea that we're in this very strange time where this invisible threat is dangerous and is killing people all around us, you know, and the numbers are rising and the threat is still here today. I think for those people who are taking it seriously, quarantine, self-isolation, lockdown, full-time, every minute of the day is a necessity. And then there's the other half who think it's a conspiracy, it doesn't really exist, and how they explain the deaths of all these people who are being taken to hospital. For me, it's kind of an eye-opener, really, because it's created two things. It's created a realization that there is something bigger and more powerful than us human beings, than money, than the material things that we have, even you know, the relationships we have with each other, not intimately, not just domestically, but internationally. You know, there is something very serious taking place right now. As an individual, as a person who's dealing with quarantine on his own with other people around me, it's a breath of fresh air. I'm kind of welcome it. I've had some experience of real lockdown, so I know what it's like to be isolated. I know what it's like to be.
We're gonna get there.
Yeah, we're gonna get there.
Okay, so I have a personal experience which has prepared me for today, tomorrow, and yesterday. But look, don't get me wrong. That's not me saying people should be able to cope with this in the same way. I have lots of people saying to me, I need to get out of this. I need to get away. And it kind of baffles me because I think, wow, you really are you really are suffering. You know, you haven't come to peace with yourself in the way that you cope with something that is challenging your perception of what life should really be like. So for me, it's been quite interesting, both internally and externally.
Wow.
I like that. We're setting the tone for this interview. I like that. All right, so I want to kind of continue that discussion, because I thought, leading with that question, I thought out of anybody we've spoken to, you were wrongfully convicted of murder and robbery, 1990. You spent 12 years in prison. And I mean, we're going to get to what you did when you came out. But that moment, if there's anyone that was prepared for lockdown, for isolation, it would be you and your experiences. I don't want to, you know, for our demographic, I want to kind of take them through that 12 years in like a slice of life moment, in terms of looking at it being, you knew your truth and you worked to make that journey and come out the other side. But what was that, you know, as a man, as a human being, what was that like for you day one, going in there, knowing that you had done nothing?
You know, I've been asked that questions a million times, Matt, and it doesn't matter how many times somebody asks me that. When I have to think back to that very moment that I was arrested and accused, and the very moment that I stood in the dock and was being tried for a crime I didn't commit, and I think back to that very moment where at 20 years old, they told me I was going to spend the rest of my life plus X amount of years in prison, never to be released, for a murder and a series of robberies I didn't commit. It doesn't matter how many times people ask me that question, how many times I have to explain it. My heart pounds as it is right now, remembering, reflecting, and taking my thinking and thoughts back to those very few moments. And I can't underestimate how terrifying it was for me, and would be for anybody, to be locked up in prison for a crime you didn't commit. I mean, it's one thing being slapped on your wrist by your parent or somebody in your family who said you did something that you didn't do. It's another thing when the system, the criminal justice system, gets it so wrong that they take away the freedom of individuals, and then they resist looking at the facts that prove that that person didn't do what they did, which meant it took years of my life. And I'm talking 20 until I was 32, the prime of my life.
Yeah.
You know, the years where I should have been discovering love, I should have been discovering relationships, I should have been discovering myself and other people, I should have been building some of my personality and character. Instead, I was cocooned in this lockdown for real inside prison. So it was torturous. And it turned me, a young 20-year-old, happy-go-lucky street guy, into a militaristic individual who did nothing every day but fight for his freedom, you know, with limited resources. I'm talking about when you asked me what it's like that very first day, when I was put in a cell. I wasn't just put in a cell, I was in a prison within a prison. The cell that I was put in didn't have a toilet. It didn't have a basin or a sink where I could wash myself. I had to piss and poo in a bucket. I had to take that bucket outside of my cell every day and empty it in the same space that 50 other guys or 20 other guys were emptying their same piss and poo, and then brush my teeth in the same space. I mean, that's the kind of conditions I was in for some time. So it was tough. It was not just physically tough in that I was cocooned in this place, in this kind of brick tomb. It was also psychologically, hygienically, every kind of Lee you could imagine. That's how tough it was for me. And there's no doubt, you know, 20 years on, I still have the scars, both physically and psychologically, from that time. So my answer to your question is, it was torturous in many, many different ways that I could explain on and on and on and on.
I appreciate your frank, like you being frank there, because it's, you know, what you've done since is very well rounded. But I appreciate, like, that's something that, I mean, that's the core of your story. That beginning has, you know, given you a path, but it's also like, it's with you all the time. So it's like, it's heavy and I can feel it. But thank you for, like, yeah, I think that first day was, I wanted to get that vibe.
Yeah. And I mean, just when you think about, you know, us as humans and stuff like that, when we're like, ooh, I'm having a bad day, or I didn't get this job. What advice would you give? Because clearly you had to have a strong mindset, because usually after prison, you know, people go back again because, you know, they don't know what's next. You know, they only know one thing because they haven't had a chance to really live their life. So what would be some advice, especially in this year where it's been so, you know, chaotic and uncertain, that you would give someone who does feel hopeless? Because I know, you know, being in prison, you were probably thinking like, you know, God, what do I do? What does this all mean? So what advice would you give?
But before I get onto that very simple piece of advice, you know, I like to think that everybody's differently, and we all cope with whatever situation we're put in a different way, and that can come from your childhood, your upbringing, your immediate social sort of network, in terms of what kind of strength of character are you. As I say, when I was in prison, I was a happy-go-lucky guy, so I didn't go in there with the resilience that I sort of built during the time that I was in prison. I didn't have the resources or the tools to learn the way that I did in the years that I was in prison. So it's testament to the fact that anybody finding themselves in a situation, especially now under lockdown, under this quarantine, or even for other reasons, that there is a way out. There is a way out. But the only way out, in my mind, and this is where the advice comes in, the only way out is you've got to look within in order to find a way out of whatever your mental constraints are, your physical constraints, or even your external relationships and stuff like that. I found that once I built the strength inside myself to deal with what I had to deal with, which was the psychological suffering and the physical suffering, I was then able to channel that butterfly in your tummy, if you like, or that stress inside my body, or that weight that was weighing me down every day. I had to get out of my bed, but I knew deep down, if I didn't, no one else would. So I had to do it myself. I had to find the strength of character. And that would be my advice to anybody. Find that strength of character in yourself, because it is within us and we can dig deep. One of the devices that I used in all the years that I was in prison was I take a shower. I take a shower every day to wash away the day's thoughts, the day's suffering, the day's struggles, or even sometimes the day's happiness. I'd wash it away in the shower when I could have a shower in the prison showers. And each drop of water that hit my body, I would think that was that bad thing, that was that bad thing. Tomorrow's going to be a new day. Now, I'd go to bed and I'd still find that weight on me the following morning. But I looked forward to that shower in the evening, knowing that whatever I had to deal with throughout the day, like people do today, I could wash it away in the evening. So find a device, whatever it is. It might be sipping the tea. It might be drinking a bit of rum. It might be going for a run. We all have a device. You've got to find your own and not seek somebody else's, because then you never really find what works for you.
Wow, that gave me chills. I mean, I love what you said about like inner work, because I always say that your inner world shapes your outer world. Like, I journal, you know, I meditate, and just finding that peace within yourself, because it is true, when you can really love yourself and dig deep, everything else in life will fall into place. So I really appreciate you saying that. That was spot on there.
I want to touch on that moment though, in that conversation, and understanding, because I think the journey is long. You went through 12 years, but it still sits with you. So in terms of the advice that you gave, how long did it actually take you, you know, to even realize that the shower was going to be your catalyst to mentally reframe? You know, 12 years, was that halfway through, or did you seem like a very well-rounded human being? So I think that comes from experience though. Do you remember the pinpoint moment you were like, all right, the shower is going to be the catalyst for me to be able to reset whenever I need to reset on a daily basis?
I don't think there was a tipping point for me, because I think the reality was, Matt, that for the first 5 or 6 years, so let's put it in real terms, I'm a human being, so numbers is one thing, but I was 20, 21, 22, 23, 24. I should have been having sex and doing drugs and running around. I should have been doing all these things. 27, so 7 years already of my life wasted in a square tomb. And during those first 7 years or so, I was volatile. I was anti everything. And so I fought physically, I fought mentally, but it didn't get me anywhere. So I suffered. as a result, by the system and by my own inability, I suppose, to utilize the strength that I was building as a human being within myself, both physically as well as mentally. And I think it just happened. It just happened where one moment I kind of, all of a sudden, I mean, there were people around me, don't get me wrong, there were other people around me who'd been in prison for longer than I'd been in prison, who had themselves suffered a miscarriage of justice. They were campaigning in a completely different way. They had people on the outside world championing their cause. I didn't have that. I had my immediate family, my sisters and my mother and my father, but they were like a drop in the ocean. No one wanted to hear their voice. Not until they joined forces with other people, which made their voice slightly louder, and then more people made their voice louder, and you know how it goes. It's like a domino effect. So there wasn't one particular moment. It was an avalanche of different things. But I think the most important thing was I was the one that was suffering more than anyone, and I was making myself suffer more. So once I overcame that challenge for myself, and you mentioned, Arani, once you go and you meditate, I did the yoga, I did the meditation, I did all that. It helped, but it didn't make me find myself. I found myself when I was comfortable and confident. And that came when I started to educate myself. It was when I was able to articulate my argument rather than physically try and fight my way. And I'm only 5'7.5", maybe 3/4. So I'm gonna, so it's not like I was a mountain of a man fighting, but I had a big mouth and I had a big heart. And that's where I found my strength, when I discovered that I wasn't the person that couldn't articulate. I wasn't the person that couldn't argue my corner. And that was against the prison officers, the guards, if you like, and other prisoners, and then the criminal justice system. So no tipping point, but an avalanche of a number of different things coming together and colliding at the right moment that made me realize what I needed to do was become a journalist from behind the bars, because I needed the media to fight my corner. I needed them to broadcast and report and tell other people that there was this young black man with dreadlocks, because I had long dreadlocks.
I seen the pictures. I saw them.
Okay, so times change, and you know what I like to say to people? It was kind of for me, it was like a 5-year experience. The first 5 years, volatile, bitter, angry. The next 5 years was education and finding the right resources and the tools. You know, I didn't have a computer. I didn't have a mobile phone. I had a single finger typewriter, tick, 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 you know. That was what I had. That was my resources. So what I'm saying is that you can't blame your resources. You can't say, well, because I don't have the finances to do this. I had a pen and a piece of paper, and my hand hurt many times as I wrote those letters to politicians, to the journalists, to campaigners, etc. So you can use whatever resources you've got at your disposal. And I'm not saying that that is as easy for everybody in any way, shape or form, but I'm just sort of saying you've got to make use of what you've got. And if you do, and you believe in that, you can take yourself further. I did.
Yeah.
You sure did.
Right. Which, speaking of, because you clearly have a very strong and resilient mindset, because even after all this has happened, you've been so successful. You know, you have a book that's about to come out, you have your podcast, and your amazing TV show on Netflix, World's Toughest Prisons. So for people who, you know, are not familiar with what that is, can you kind of, you know, tell us what it's about and kind of walk us through the journey of how that all kind of came together?
So I was very fortunate, as opposed to those guys and girls who come out of prison and they don't find the right path and they end up turning to drugs, drink, alcohol, or continue to commit crime, or out of economical desperation continue to commit crime, whatever their circumstances. But for some reason, a lot of people, 60%, probably that amount in America as it is here in the United Kingdom, who end up going back to prison in this revolving door. I was very lucky in that, as I say, when I was in jail, I studied journalism, not to become a journalist, but to use the knowledge to convince other journalists to write and tell stories about my story. So when I came out of prison, when I was finally exonerated and I was freed and I had my life back after 12 years, and I'd done all the banging I could to catch up in those 12 years, and I did all the kind of running around trying to holiday. So when I spent the first 9 or 10 months catching up, or trying to catch up, trying to live a 20-year-old's life as a 32-year-old, never quite made it, and I'm still trying. But I think I think what happened was I met a man, and I think this is what it comes down to. It always comes down to this. Even though I thought I could do things on my own, I met a man who gave me an opportunity, and he was a powerful individual in charge of the BBC, one of the BBC, the British Broadcasting Corporation's most influential radio programs. And he and I bumped into each other at the back of a studio, and he offered me an opportunity, and that started my career. He didn't know me. I'd never done anything broadcast wise, but he offered me the opportunity to come and work at his radio station, and I went from there. Really, I suppose I used my ability as a conniving, direct, resilient individual, and I combined that with the knowledge I was now gathering to work in this institution. And don't get me wrong, I was sitting next to people when I started out in my career who thought, ex-prisoner, you know, did he or didn't he? You know, he must be tough. What kind of things has he suffered in the prison? I could feel that's what they were thinking, even if they didn't ask me the question. Did I care? No, I was free. I was embarking on a journey that I didn't know existed in my mind 2 years earlier. So I started working for the BBC, and I had a 16-year distinguished career with the BBC, working for their most flagship radio and television documentary programs. And then, because of my expertise, if you like, working in the criminal justice system, Netflix came knocking. Netflix came knocking because they just commissioned this Inside the World's Toughest Prison with a British broadcasting company. And they wanted someone who was credible, someone who was authentic, someone who would not sensationalize what doesn't need to be sensationalized. You don't need to look into the eyes of a man who's suffering and try and make it sound like he's suffering. You can see that.
Yeah.
You don't have to look into the eyes of the face of a person who's committed an horrendous crime and try and pretend that this is an horrendous crime. You only have to tell people this person has committed murder and whatever. So both Netflix and not so much Netflix, but the production company that was working towards Netflix and we agreed that I would do this program, but I had to do it on my terms to some extent. And that meant that there was nobody looking over my shoulder telling me what I should and shouldn't be doing. Of course, within reason. In the industry, there is always going to be some caveat, but they can't tell me what questions to ask. They can't tell me what I should be shocked by and how I should react to the things that I'm seeing. So when Netflix commissioned the season, that's what we agreed on. I'd go inside prisons around the world, and I would look at how prisons around the world, the cultures of those countries, treat rehabilitation with security, because that's what it's about, isn't it? It's about how do you lock up and contain people who have done wicked things, as well as those who have done desperate things and maybe shouldn't be in prison. So how and why do you do that? But once you've got them confined, what resources do you invest in changing their lives, giving them another opportunity, if another opportunity is necessary? I don't believe personally that the system can do that. It takes the individual to want to change. And I think if they provide them with the means and the resources, then they stand a much better chance. So that's how the Netflix program came about. You know, I the first prison I went to was Brazil. And you'd think, wouldn't you, that after spending 12 years trying to get out of prison, why the hell I would willingly go back?
You're the perfect storyteller for it, though. That's why, because I mean, it must feel, because that intro and then like the gate goes behind you and it's literally like a strip down and it's a process. That's, I mean, the best line from the whole series, I think, is "This is not Mama's house." The guard says, "This is not Mama's house." It's the best line I've ever heard, because I'm like, but that disparity though, I've watched all the episodes through all the seasons. You going in must be like, holy shit, like the emotions must be high, but you're like hit the ground running and you're like immersed in these, and they're so distinctly different. Like everything is so different. Is there a common thread that you have seen throughout all these prisons, whether it be like, you know, the rehabilitation side of things, but within the people, like because some of the characters you meet, they're beautiful people. They're a murderer. Like this, we're all still human beings. But
you're not calling
watching
murderers beautiful people by any chance.
There's some really interesting, beautiful people, and then you're like, oh, that one like slashed someone's throat, or like this, I don't know.
I know.
It's the person. You're a storyteller. What's that like going in? What's the response from the actual prisoners going like, who is this fella coming in?
Well, I think the first thing to mention is that, yeah, you're right. When I land in the country, if you like, and then it's time to go into the prison, automatically I take on the persona of what helped me survive in all those years. So from the moment I step down from the prison or the police van and I'm handcuffed, I know what's ahead of me. I don't know what the cultural difference is. I don't know how dangerous a particular place is, but I've been there, I've seen it, and I've done it, and I've survived it. And that's not me being in a position where I say I can survive anything, because I don't go in there complacently. I go in there fearfully, scared. I go in there trepidation, and I warn the team that I'm working with, which is a very small team. I don't have any security or anything like that. I rely on my wits and the trust that I build with the prisoners to survive and to ensure that no one wants to take me or my crew out for their 15 minutes of fame. It's a very fine balance. But in terms of going into the prison and what the common thread is, I mean, there is a format to the show, obviously. I try and find out, what the resources are, what they do in terms of providing food for prisoners, whether that's the right thing or the wrong thing. And you've probably seen that in Ariane, that in these places, some places, they don't have enough food to feed prisoners. What food they do feed the prisoners is disgusting. Where the prisoners sleep, so it's very different in all of these different countries. But the one thread that runs through every one of these programs is the social suffering of almost all of the prisoners. They come from deprived societies. These are not wealthy, working class, even middle class. What we're dealing with is the reality of societies all over the world, whether it's Brazil, Costa Rica, Belize, Papua New Guinea, Europe, or anywhere else. It's people who suffer because they don't have the economic ability to provide for themselves or their families. And that's not me saying, and let me make this clear, that's not me saying that anybody that comes from those environments, because that's exactly where I come from, anybody that comes from those environments end up going to prison. It's just that the majority of the people that are in prison around the world come from those backgrounds, and their crime is often driven by economics. They want money to buy drugs, food, whatever it is, or their social upbringing is abusive, etc., and it just drives and reinforces who they are. So that's what you need to do, not get them in prison, get them outside.
I like that. I think that the whole scope of the series really kind of, and it seems like a word of mouth situation, because I've told friends and they're like, holy shit, this is amazing. I got 2 girlfriends that are binge watching. I was like, honey, I'm speaking to him on Friday. Thanks, same question. Don't you worry.
Matt was so excited. He was like,
I was like, no, we do a lot of these, and I was like, sometimes they're like special. And I think during quarantine, I like binged the whole thing, and I was like, this is fascinating. And you're the perfect storyteller to tell it.
Yeah.
I think that's why it's connecting and building steam and getting even wider audience now. Lockdown was a great moment because everybody was looking for something to kind of binge and get. So kudos to you, my friend, on telling stories, and not sensationalizing things and giving, some of it's kind of like, I was like, what are you going back in for, man? Don't go in there. Shit, don't do it.
I know, but you know why it works, and I appreciate the kudos you give me and the props you give me for the show. And one of the reasons it does work is because I'm trying to not be judgmental. I'm just allowing guys to tell their stories. And I personally have been blown away by the international audience's response, because, when you do things about prison, crime, criminals, the general consensus is, why the hell are you doing that? Why are you giving them the time and space after what they've done and the crimes that they've committed? Well, I think the picture is bigger than that. It's about how we as a society, internationally, globally, treat those who need our help, and I'm not talking about criminals. I'm talking about victims here. It's the victims that need our help. But we can only help the victims if we deal with the criminals. So let's have a look at what we're doing with the criminals so that we can help the victims. But no one really sees it like that. And that's why when I go in, I'm not judging these individuals. I love the idea, Matt, Ariane, but when I go in there, most of these guys, I don't even know what they're in for. So when they tell me, it's like, really? Fuck me. I really do kind of react in that way because I don't know. But that's how it should be, shouldn't it?
Yes.
We don't know what people are like until you find out what their backstory is. So we then find out that this poor kid had suffered sexual abuse himself or was a drug addict because he come from a parental family that was dysfunctional, whatever their background. And then we find out that they are a mass murderer. And you think, oh, my God, this is just crazy. But yeah, it's about painting that picture.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I definitely want to get this in because we are sadly running out of time.
Okay.
But, really quick, with your podcast, Second Chance, which is so fitting to have the title. Do you think with the system that they should provide more opportunity for people to get a second chance?
I think there are lots of opportunities. I just don't think they're joined up. I think what I find is that the resources that go into prisons, and we're talking billions and billions in each country, which adds up to trillions and trillions around the world. I just don't think those resources are allocated in the right way. There are so many different organizations offering almost identical programs and projects for re-entry, re-socialization, read this, read that, read the other. There should be one cap fits all because every person comes out of prison in the same way. They might have different problems, but they walk out the same gate that they went in on. And it's a conveyor belt. If you don't put them on the right path, then you don't do the right thing. So I think giving people a second chance, giving them an opportunity to get their life back starts in prison and can be successful outside if the resources are allocated in the right way.
Okay.
I think that sums up. So when is this book dropping? What's going on? When can we expect? Is it going to be a Christmas gift guide seller?
I wish I knew. Look, it should be ready in the coming weeks. Notorious is
notorious, baby. Yes,
notorious. And if you look carefully in the title, it's got not I. So that's the kind of clever bit. When you look at the notorious, there's the not I. Okay, so no biggie smalls here. The book is coming out. It's been a long time coming. People have been asking me to write my memoirs, but my life is private. I'm out there working on what I work, but my private life is very private. I say that, my backstory. So yeah, my book, my podcast, these are the things that I'm progressing. TV is one thing. I've enjoyed doing the podcast, talking to interesting people. Decided to write this book.
Yeah. Well, for people who are living under a rock, let everyone know, where they can keep up with you, your podcast, to be able to know when the book's going to come out, your show. Go ahead and plug where everyone can find you.
Look, I'm a very simple guy. A reporter, AREPORTER, at A Reporter, on Instagram, on Twitter. You go on there, you can find me, and then there's always these little links on those platforms that can take you to other platforms where I am. But I appreciate you guys giving me the opportunity.
He engages too. He converses and he talks to people. That's how we all gathered.
Well, where can everybody follow you at, Matt?
You can follow me at Matt Dillon 1983. The dog's gone, so we'll let her go.
You guys can follow me across the board at Ariane Andrew, and of course, Sipping the Tea TV show. It has been a pleasure having you on.
Thank you, Rafael.
Yes, and sharing your story. So we appreciate you. Thank you for, just being so open and candid with us. We really appreciate you.
You're welcome, guys, and thank you for having me on. And I hope your listeners have enjoyed our conversation, which I'm sure they have.
They will.
Yes, they definitely will. All right, guys. Thank you guys for tuning in. You can catch us next week, same time, same place, on another episode of Sipping the Tea TV show.
Oh, I like that little outro, Hanny.